It is week 108 right here on Econo Chat. Let's talk business with Mr. Daniel Steinman. A warm welcome to all our listeners and a warm welcome to Mr. Daniel Steinman himself. I'm Elsa Binyani, your hostess, and we are talking interim budget. Yes, Mr. Daniel Steinman, a warm welcome to you as well.
Thank you, Elsa B. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. Mm-hmm. What are we talking about, the interim budget?
Interim budget. You need to first give us a definition of what interim budget is for the listeners who do not know. A very short one.
Brief. Yeah. You remember that discussions we had about all the different calendars?
Yes.
And that there's a fiscal calendar, and it starts on the 1st of April. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now at the end of October, we are at the first 6 months of that fiscal calendar. Yeah. So the first semester will be complete by another week or so. Mm-hmm. So we are at the point of reckoning. Mm. And what happens then is that usually the minister has to make what we call in Namlish environments, which is actually virement. But I'm not going to try and teach anybody French. It means that it is adjustments between the votes, where there are some surplus funds. These are moved or shifted to where there is a budgetary need. Mm-hmm. So you sort of look at your balance sheet and you see, there we overshot, here we undershot, there's a surplus, there's an under expense, and you move the available money around according to demand. Yeah. So it's not just a eye blind type exercise. Mm-hmm. It's a very practical type exercise, and this is now where we will be in little bit more than a week. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I call it the point of reckoning, because you must remember, and I've said this many times, when you work with a budget, it's a forward-looking document. Yeah. In other words, you take a view on the future. Mm-hmm. It is not the same as the national accounts, which is a backward-looking, which is a historical document. Yeah. There you've got all the facts. Everything is proven. You adjust it according to the available data, but there's no guessing or estimating or anything. It's known. Whereas with a budget, you work on a best case scenario. And by best case, I don't mean the most positive budget, I mean the most accurate budget, whether it is positive or whether it is negative. For instance, Elsa, to make this practical, we suffered a lot during COVID and after COVID. Yeah. Now you can imagine, if nobody is sure of anything, and the government is not sure of its income, then drawing up a budget can be very difficult. I mean, what do we have never had a COVID type environment. Yes. So you can imagine that working with a budget under those circumstances can be very difficult. So Elsie, what we are looking at now is sort of a comparison where we can measure or compare the performance of this fiscal year to previous fiscal years. And I specifically mentioned the example of the during COVID and immediately post-COVID budgets, because they were very unreliable, very unpredictable, because of the weird circumstances. Not because we don't know how to use a calculator, we know that very well, but because it was basically impossible to anticipate the impact of COVID itself, and then the trajectory of the recoupment period after that. We didn't know. We were so lucky in 2023 when we had these fantastic growth figures. And we are relatively lucky again in 2024, but we have settled back into a fairly reliably predictable pattern. So what comes now in a week from now is that the minister will say, look, on the income side, on the revenue side, we are about 2% below, and on the expenditure side, we are 4% below. not for the whole year, but for this point in the year.
Yeah.
That's a very important thing, That's it's like an assessment point.
Yeah.
You take one step back after the end of 6 months, and you sort of, by looking at the figures, you make an assessment. What have we achieved? Are we on track? Will we hit the targets as we anticipated them in February when we tabled the main budget?
Yeah.
So the interim budget is really an exercise of taking stock,
Okay.
and then strategizing what we must do with the money that's left to actually get to the targets that we set for ourselves.
I don't think anyone could have explained that better than you, Mr. Daniel Steinman. On that note, let's quickly go for a short break, and once we come back, we will get into more details in regards to what will be happening on the 28th of October.